As soon as my husband found out about the massive inheritance, he laughed in my face. "Sign the divorce papers and get out," he yelled, claiming he was a millionaire now. He filed for divorce and I signed it without a second thought. But the moment the estate lawyer read the secret clause in the will, my soon-to-be ex-husband screamed in absolute horror. "My name is Kiara. I am 34 years old, and for 5 years I was married to a man who mistook my silence for weakness. I work as a forensic accountant, though my husband and his family always dismissed me as a glorified desk jockey who just pushed papers around all day. They had no idea that my job involved dismantling fraudulent empires and tracking hidden assets for high-net-worth clients. They also had no idea that I secretly owned a highly lucrative private venture capital firm. To them, I was just plain boring Kiara, a woman who did not deserve to sit at their prestigious dinner table. The defining moment of my life happened on a humid Tuesday afternoon in an affluent suburb of Atlanta. We were gathered at the sprawling estate of Uncle Silas for his repast. Uncle Silas was the patriarch of my husband's family, a self-made real estate mogul who built his empire from the ground up. He was a tough, no-nonsense man who demanded excellence, while the rest of the family spent their time asking him for handouts and treating him like a personal bank account. I was the only one who ever sat with him to actually discuss market trends, property acquisitions, and asset management. He respected me, and I respected him. But unfortunately, Uncle Silas had passed away unexpectedly, leaving his entire family waiting like vultures to pick his estate clean. The repast was supposed to be a time of mourning, but the atmosphere in the grand dining room felt more like a celebration. Classic rhythm and blues played softly from the surround sound speakers, mingling with the rich scents of fried chicken, collard greens, and baked macaroni and cheese. Dozens of relatives dressed in expensive black mourning attire mingled and laughed, holding crystal glasses filled with top-shelf liquor. My husband Dion, who was 36 years old and held a useless vice president title at a small logistics company, was holding court in the center of the room. He had a drink in his hand and a wide, arrogant smile on his face. I was standing quietly near the buffet table, serving myself a small portion of macaroni and cheese. I wanted nothing more than to eat my food in peace and leave. That was when my phone buzzed with an automated alert from the state court system. But before I could even look at the screen, a heavy manila folder was slammed violently onto the table right in front of me. The impact sent a glob of cheese sauce flying through the air, landing directly on the collar of my pristine white silk blouse. I slowly looked up from the ruined fabric to see Dayon standing over me. His chest was puffed out and he was gripping his smartphone so tightly his knuckles were turning pale. He had just received an email from the estate executors, and the sheer greed radiating from his eyes was blinding. "Sign the divorce papers." "Kiara," he announced, his voice booming loud enough to bring the entire room to a dead halt. The music seemed to fade away, as every single relative turned to stare at us. Dayon did not care about the audience. In fact, he reveled in it. "I am done carrying dead weight. I just got the official confirmation from the estate. I am the sole heir to $15 million and the controlling shares of Uncle Silas's company. I am a multi-millionaire now." I stood there staring at the folder resting against my plate. I did not cry. I did not scream. I calmly picked up a linen napkin and dabbed the cheese sauce off my blouse. Dion took my silence as submission and continued his public humiliation. "You have been holding me back for years with your boring middle-class mindset," he sneered. "You do not belong in my world. And to be completely honest, I have already moved on. Chloe is pregnant with my son, a real heir to the Silas bloodline. So pack your cheap suits and get out of my house. I have already filed the paperwork online. All you have to do is sign this physical copy so my lawyer can expedite the process." A collective gasp echoed through the dining room, followed immediately by hushed whispers. Chloe was a 24-year-old receptionist at Dion's office. I had known about his infidelity for months. As a forensic accountant, tracking his secret hotel charges and jewelry purchases was child's play. I had simply been biding my time, gathering irrefutable evidence. Before I could respond, my mother-in-law, Beatrice, stepped out from the crowd. She was 60 years old, draped in excessive black lace, and wearing a string of pearls that she adjusted with a condescending smirk. Beatrice had always despised me. She believed her family was the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta society, and that I was completely beneath them. Finally, Beatrice declared, clapping her hands together in dramatic relief. This family needs a woman of true Atlanta excellence, not a glorified desk jockey who spends her days crunching other people's numbers to pay off her student loans. Dion is destined for the elite. He is going to be a titan of industry, and he needs a wife who understands high society. You were always just a placeholder, Kiara. Be a good girl, sign the papers, and walk away before we make things difficult for you. My sister-in-law. Tasha stepped up right beside her mother. Tasha was 32, obsessed with designer labels, and constantly trying to project an image of extreme wealth, despite having no actual career. She crossed her arms, showing off a brand new diamond bracelet. Beatrice is right, Tasha chimed in, laughing maliciously. You do not fit in here, Kiara. You never did. You are always so obsessed with budgets and savings. It is embarrassing. Dion is about to buy a mansion in Buckhead, and you are going to be stuck living in some cramped apartment. Just sign the paper and go back to your miserable little spreadsheets. I looked at the three of them. Dion looking smug and victorious, Beatrice radiating elitist pride, Tasha glowing with unearned arrogance. They truly believed they held all the power. They believed I was trapped, broken, and humiliated. I reached into my leather purse and pulled out my custom Mont Blanc pen. The heavy gold barrel caught the light of the crystal chandelier above us. I uncapped the pen with a soft click. You want freedom, Dion? I asked, my voice smooth and perfectly calm. You got it. I flipped the manila folder open, turned directly to the signature page, and signed my name with fluid, elegant strokes. I did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. I closed the folder and held it out to him. Dion snatched the folder from my hand, a massive grin breaking across his face. He held the papers up like a trophy. I am free, he shouted to the room. I am a millionaire and I am finally free. I turned my attention to my sister-in-law, keeping my posture perfectly straight. Oh, and Tasha, I said, raising my voice just enough so the wealthy church gossips in the front row could hear me clearly. Since you are so concerned about my miserable spreadsheets, I assume you will not need my help anymore. That designer Birkin bag you are holding, you might want to return it. Because I am the one who paid off your secret credit card last month, so the bank would not repossess your husband's leased Lexus. Your cards are cut off as of today. Good luck maintaining your high society image with zero credit. Tasha's jaw dropped. The smug smile vanished from her face, instantly replaced by a deep, flushed humiliation as the relatives around her began whispering furiously. Dion ignored his sister's embarrassment. He was too drunk on his own perceived power. He turned toward the back of the room and gestured wildly. Lawyer Harrison, get up here. Read the will out loud. I want everyone in this room to hear exactly what Uncle Silas left me. I want everyone to know who is running this family now. Lawyer Harrison, an older, distinguished man in a sharp charcoal suit, stepped forward from the shadows of the hallway. He was the primary executor of Uncle Silas's estate. He carried a thick leather-bound portfolio under his arm. He did not look happy. In fact, he looked at Dion with a mixture of profound pity and utter exhaustion. Harrison cleared his throat and pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up the bridge of his nose. He glanced down at the freshly signed divorce papers, tightly gripped in Dion's hand. Dion Harrison began, his voice gravelly and serious. Are you absolutely certain you want to officially execute these divorce papers today? File them right now, Dion barked, waving his hand impatiently. I want her completely gone. I do not want her having access to a single dime of my new fortune. I checked my watch and smiled. Actually, I already had my assistant file my counter-signature electronically exactly 3 minutes ago, I stated calmly. It is in the state court system. It is legally binding and irreversible as of right now. Lawyer Harrison let out a long, heavy sigh. He opened the leather portfolio, turned to the fourth page of the official will, and looked directly into Dion's eyes. Very well, Harrison said, his voice projecting clearly across the dead silent dining room. I will read Clause 7 of the last will and testament of Silas Montgomery. Dion puffed his chest out, ready to receive his crown. Harrison began to read. The sum of $15 million in liquid assets, along with the controlling shares of Silas Enterprises, shall be transferred to my nephew Dion Montgomery on one strict condition. He must remain legally and faithfully married to his wife Kiara. The color immediately drained from Dion's face. Harrison continued reading, enunciating every single word. In the event that Dion initiates a divorce filing, or in the event of proven infidelity on his part, his entire inheritance is immediately revoked. He shall receive absolutely nothing. The heavy, suffocating silence in the room was shattered by the sound of Dion dropping the manila folder onto the hardwood floor. He let out a breathless, horrifying scream. Dion snatched the folder from my hand, a massive, victorious grin breaking across his face. He held the papers up high like a championship trophy for the whole room to see. "I am free," he shouted to the room, his voice echoing off the high ceilings and vibrating through the floorboards. "I am a millionaire and I am finally free." His declaration was met with roaring applause from his side of the family. His mother Beatrice clapped her hands together, tears of absolute joy streaming down her perfectly powdered cheeks. She rushed forward and wrapped her arms around her son, burying her face in his expensive suit jacket. "We finally did it, Dion," she praised him loudly, making sure everyone in the grand dining room heard her. "You are finally rid of that miserable woman. Now our family can take its rightful place at the very top of Atlanta society. You are going to be a titan, my boy, a true king." Tasha, my sister-in-law, was practically vibrating with excitement. She had already pulled out her smartphone and was scrolling through luxury real estate listings. "Dion, you have to buy that 8-bedroom estate in Buckhead." Tasha squealed, her eyes wide with unearned greed. "The one with the indoor pool and the tennis courts. Oh, and you promised you would pay off my Mercedes lease. Remember, I need a new wardrobe for the country club immediately. We are rich now. We are practically royalty." I stood quietly by the buffet table, completely ignored by the celebrating masses. I did not move a single muscle. I just watched them. As a forensic accountant, I had spent my entire professional career analyzing human greed. I had watched wealthy corporate executives crumble under federal indictments, and I had seen corrupt politicians weep when confronted with their own bank statements. But watching my soon-to-be ex-husband celebrate a fortune he was about to lose was by far the most satisfying moment of my life. Dion broke away from his mother's embrace and turned his attention to the heavy oak doors at the end of the dining room. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers aggressively, signaling for the estate executor. "Lawyer Harrison, get out here right now." Dion barked, his voice dripping with newfound entitlement. "Bring the official documents. I want you to read the will out loud in front of everyone. I want my entire family to hear exactly what Uncle Silas left me. Let them all witness my ascension." The heavy oak doors slowly pushed open. Lawyer Harrison stepped into the room. He was a distinguished older gentleman in a sharp charcoal suit, carrying a thick leather-bound portfolio under his arm. Harrison had been Uncle Silas's personal attorney and closest confidant for over 30 years. He was a man of immense integrity and zero patience for foolishness. He walked into the dining room with slow, deliberate steps. He did not look happy. In fact, he looked at Dion with a mixture of profound pity and utter exhaustion. Harrison adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and cleared his throat. The low hum of conversations in the room immediately died down. Everyone leaned in, eager to hear the exact dollar amounts being handed over to Dion. "Before we begin the formal reading of the estate," Harrison said, his voice gravelly and deeply serious, "I need to address the matter of the documents currently in your hand." He pointed a steady finger at the manila folder Dion was gripping. "Are you absolutely certain you want to officially execute those divorce papers today? I strongly advise you to take a moment and think carefully about your next steps." Dion scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes as if the seasoned attorney was a bothersome child. "Think carefully," Dion mocked. "There is absolutely nothing to think about, Harrison. I want her gone. I want this boring middle-class dead weight out of my life permanently. She has been holding me back for 5 years. Now that I am the sole heir to Uncle Silas's $15 million fortune, I am cutting all ties. File them right now." Lawyer Harrison did not flinch. He looked at Dion with a gaze so cold it could have frozen water. I am required by law and by my loyalty to your late uncle to give you one final opportunity to reconsider your actions. Harrison warned, his tone dropping an octave. Once these papers are processed, the legal ramifications regarding your inheritance will be swift and irreversible. Do you understand what I am saying to you, Dion? Beatrice stepped forward, waving her hand dismissively at the lawyer. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Harrison, she snapped. My son knows exactly what he is doing. He is securing his future. Kiara has always been a terrible fit for this family. She brings nothing to the table. She has no connections, no pedigree, and no vision. Dayon is protecting his new assets from a woman who only wants to drag him down. Go ahead and file the papers, Dion. Do not let this old man stall you. Dion nodded emphatically, feeding off his mother's toxic encouragement. You heard her, Harrison, Dion commanded, stepping forward and shoving the signed divorce papers directly into the lawyer's chest. File them immediately. I want the courts to process this today. I want her out of my house, out of my family, and out of my tax bracket. I reached up and casually tapped the glass face of my wristwatch. The soft clinking sound drew the room's attention back to me. You do not need to worry about filing those physical papers, Harrison, I said, my voice cutting through the thick, humid air of the room like a perfectly sharpened blade. I already had my lead assistant file my countersignature electronically. It went through the state court system exactly 3 minutes ago. The digital stamp has been verified and processed by the clerk's office. The divorce is officially on the record. It is legally binding, entirely documented, and completely irreversible. Dion threw his head back and laughed, a cruel echoing sound that filled the massive estate. Good, he shouted, clapping his hands together. That saves me the lawyer fees. You finally did something efficient for once in your life, Kiara. Now pack your bags and call a taxi. You are trespassing on my property. I did not break eye contact with him. I simply smiled, crossing my arms over my ruined silk blouse. Read the will, Harrison, I instructed softly. Let the man hear what he won. Lawyer Harrison let out a long, heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 disappointments. He opened his thick leather portfolio and carefully turned the crisp, heavy parchment pages until he reached the very middle of the document. The room was so quiet, you could hear the ice melting in the crystal glasses. Tasha leaned forward on her toes, practically salivating at the thought of the money. Beatrice clutched her pearls, her chin raised high in absolute triumph. I shall now read Clause 7 of the last will and testament of Silas Montgomery, Harrison announced. His voice was steady and unrelenting. It resonated with the authority of the grave. The sum of $15 million in liquid assets, along with the controlling shares of Silas Enterprises, the commercial real estate portfolio, and the primary residential estate, shall be transferred to my nephew, Dion Montgomery, Harrison read, pausing for a fraction of a second. Dion pumped his fist in the air, mouthing the words, 15 million to his mother, who was already crying tears of joy again. On one strict, non-negotiable condition, Harrison continued, raising his voice to overpower Dion's premature celebration. Dion froze. His fist slowly lowered. The triumphant smile on his face twitched. Condition, he asked, his voice suddenly sounding very small. What condition? Uncle Silas never mentioned a condition to me. Harrison did not look up from the page. He must remain legally, faithfully, and actively married to his current wife, Kiara. The entire dining room gasped in unison. Beatrice's jaw dropped open. Tasha let out a sharp, confused squeak. Dion stood paralyzed, his eyes wide and unblinking as the words slowly processed in his arrogant brain. I wrote this specific clause because Kiara is the only person in this family with the financial intelligence, the moral integrity, and the strength of character required to manage my legacy. Harrison read, quoting Uncle Silas's exact words directly from the will. Dayon is easily manipulated, prone to terrible financial decisions, and lacks the discipline to lead. He will only receive this inheritance if he remains guided and grounded by Kiara's counsel as her loyal husband. Dion's chest began to heave. He took a stumbling step backward, shaking his head in denial. No, he whispered. No, that cannot be right. Read it again. You are reading it wrong, Harrison. I am reading it exactly as your uncle dictated it in my office 6 months ago, Harrison replied coldly. But I am not finished. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Dayon. In the event of a divorce filing initiated by either party, or in the event of proven infidelity. On Dion's part, his status as the primary beneficiary is immediately revoked in its entirety. He shall be stripped of all financial claims, all property rights, and all corporate titles associated with Silas Enterprises. He shall receive absolutely nothing. The thick, suffocating silence in the room was shattered by the sound of Dion's heavy breathing. His dark eyes darted frantically between the lawyer, the divorce papers, and me. The triumphant, arrogant smile that had plastered his face just moments ago melted away, replaced by an expression of sheer, unadulterated horror. His skin turned an ashen shade of gray. The reality of his colossal mistake was crashing down on him with the force of a falling building. He had just bragged about his pregnant mistress in front of the entire family. He had just demanded a divorce. And I had just filed the legally binding paperwork 3 minutes ago. He had literally handed away $15 million because his ego was too large and his brain was too small. But I didn't know. Dion stammered, his voice cracking, panic bleeding into his tone. I didn't know about the clause. You cannot do this. I am his nephew. I carry the family name. I am the bloodline. The law does not care about your bloodline, Dion Harrison stated bluntly, snapping the leather portfolio shut. The law cares about the written parameters of the trust. By openly declaring your infidelity with this Chloe woman today, and by confirming the electronic filing of your divorce papers, you have explicitly violated the core stipulations of Clause 7. You have defaulted on the inheritance. Beatrice rushed forward, grabbing the lawyer's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. You have to fix this, Harrison, she shrieked, her earlier composure completely destroyed. You have to tear up those divorce papers, pretend this never happened. Dion was just angry. He didn't mean it. Kiara, tell him to cancel the filing. Cancel it right now. You owe this family. I looked at my mother-in-law, feeling a cold, satisfying smile spread across my face. I do not owe you anything, Beatrice. I warned you all that actions have consequences. You wanted a woman of true Atlanta excellence for your son. You wanted him to be free of his boring desk jockey wife. Well, congratulations are in order. Dion is officially free, and he is also completely undeniably broke. The wealthy church gossips in the front row, who had just been nodding along with Beatrice's insults, were now whispering furiously behind their hands. The scandal was too delicious for them to ignore. They watched eagerly as the golden child of the Montgomery family realized he had just thrown away generational wealth for a 24-year-old receptionist. Dion fell to his knees. The sharp thud of his kneecaps hitting the polished hardwood floor echoed through the room. He reached out, trying to grab the edge of the dining table to steady himself, knocking over a crystal glass in the process. The expensive liquor spilled across the table, dripping onto the floor right next to his designer shoes. Please, Kiara. He begged, his voice trembling with desperation, completely abandoning his previous arrogance. Please, you have to stop this. You know I did not mean what I said. Chloe means nothing to me. She was just a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake. I love you. We can go to counseling. We can fix this marriage. Just withdraw the papers. I stared down at him, feeling absolutely no pity for the pathetic man groveling at my feet. You love me, Dion? I asked, my voice echoing with icy precision. Is that why you used our joint checking account to pay for Chloe's prenatal vitamins? Is that why you bought her a $5,000 diamond promise ring last Thursday while telling me you were working late on a logistics report? I am a forensic accountant, Dion. I track hidden money for a living. Did you honestly believe you were smart enough to hide a second life from me? I have every receipt, every hotel booking, and every deleted text message meticulously documented, time-stamped, and backed up on a secure cloud server. Your infidelity was legally proven weeks ago. Even if you somehow managed to cancel the divorce filing, which you cannot, the evidence of your affair alone triggers Clause 7. You were doomed the second you decided to step outside of our marriage. The moment those words left my mouth, absolute chaos erupted. Dion scrambled up from the hardwood floor, his designer suit wrinkled and stained with spilled liquor. The reality of his complete exposure shattered the last pieces of his arrogant facade. His eyes darted wildly around the room, meeting the shocked stares of the wealthy church elders who had previously treated him like royalty. He was no longer the golden child. He was a humiliated adulterer who had just fumbled a massive life-changing $15 million bag. Unable to process his colossal failure, Dion directed his blinding rage entirely at me. "You set me up!" he screamed, his face contorting into a mask of pure fury. "You tricked me into signing those papers. You planned this whole thing just to steal my money." With a violent movement, Dion lunged across the buffet table, his hands reaching frantically for my leather purse. "Give me your phone!" he demanded, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "Give me your phone right now! Cancel the filing! Cancel it right now!" I did not flinch once. I did not retreat. I simply took a graceful step to the left, allowing his forward momentum to carry him straight into the edge of the heavy oak table. He stumbled awkwardly, knocking a massive silver platter of roasted vegetables onto the floor with a deafening crash. I picked up a crystal glass of iced sweet tea and took a slow, refreshing sip. The cold liquid was a perfect contrast to the suffocating tension filling the room. "Actions have consequences, Dion." I stated, my tone remarkably steady and conversational. "You wanted to play the role of a wealthy, untouchable bachelor. You wanted to discard me in front of your entire family to feed your massive ego. I simply gave you the exact stage you requested. It is not my fault you forgot to read the script." Before Dion could attempt another lunge, Beatrice shoved her way past him, nearly tripping over her black lace gown. She inserted herself between us, desperate to reclaim control. Beatrice had spent her entire life curating a flawless image of high society perfection. Watching her beloved son humiliate himself over a 24-year-old receptionist and a botched inheritance was destroying her carefully constructed reality. Instead of scolding Dion for his massive betrayal, Beatrice chose absolute delusional denial. She threw her head back and let out a shrill, theatrical laugh that echoed through the room. She turned to face the whispering crowd, flashing a tight smile designed to reassure the gossiping church elders. "Oh, please," Beatrice announced loudly, waving her manicured hand in the air as if swatting away a minor inconvenience. "Let us stop this ridiculous performance right now. This little stunt changes absolutely nothing. So what if Dion made a minor mistake in his marriage? So what if this ungrateful girl filed some petty paperwork? It truly does not matter." Beatrice turned her sharp, venomous glare toward me, her eyes burning with centuries of unearned elitist pride. "You really thought you could walk away with Silas's fortune," she sneered, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You thought you could use some technicality to steal the Montgomery family wealth. You are a fool, Kiara. If Dion does not receive the money, it automatically defaults to the next of kin. And as Silas's only living sister, I am the rightful matriarch of this family. The money goes to me." Beatrice spun around to face the estate executor, her posture rigid with entitlement. "Read the rest of the document, Harrison," she commanded, snapping her fingers at the seasoned attorney. "Read the contingency clause so this miserable little accountant can finally understand her place. Tell her that the $15 million and the controlling shares belong to me." Lawyer Harrison did not look intimidated by Beatrice's shrill demands. He slowly pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up the bridge of his nose and let out another heavy, exhausted sigh. He looked at Beatrice with an expression of profound, unfiltered pity. "Beatrice, I strongly advise you to compose yourself," Harrison warned gently, his gravelly voice cutting through her delusional rant. "Silas was a meticulous businessman. He did not leave his legacy to chance, and he certainly did not leave it to default bloodlines. He crafted this trust with absolute precision to protect his life's work from financial incompetence." Harrison opened the thick leather portfolio once again, flipping past the signature pages until he reached the final addendum of Clause 7. The dining room fell completely silent once more. Even Dion stopped breathing, his dark eyes locked onto the crisp parchment paper in the lawyer's hands. "The will explicitly names a designated secondary beneficiary," Harrison read aloud, his voice steady and resolute. "In the event that my nephew Dion Montgomery defaults on the stipulations of his inheritance, either through divorce or proven infidelity, 100% of the liquid assets, the commercial real estate portfolio, and the controlling shares of Silas Enterprises shall not pass to any other blood relative." Beatrice gasped, her hands flying up to clutch her string of pearls. "But I am his sister," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "That is illegal. He cannot bypass his own flesh and blood." Harrison ignored her outburst and continued reading the binding legal document. Instead, the entirety of the $15 million estate is immediately and irrevocably transferred to K-Nova Holdings, a private venture capital firm based out of Atlanta, Georgia. The transfer is effective immediately upon Dion's default. The name of the company hung in the air like a thick, heavy, suffocating fog. Dion blinked rapidly, his forehead glistening with a fresh layer of nervous sweat. He looked around the room, hoping anyone could explain what had just happened to his massive fortune. "What the hell is K-Nova Holdings?" Dion demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous, threatening growl. He stepped toward Lawyer Harrison, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "Is that some rival corporation? Did Uncle Silas sell out his own family to a bunch of corporate suits? Who owns K-Nova Holdings?" I slowly lowered my crystal glass of sweet tea, setting it down onto the wooden buffet table with a sharp, deliberate clink. The sound drew Dion's furious gaze away from the lawyer and directly back to me. I stood perfectly straight, smoothing down the front of my tailored slacks, shedding the timid, quiet persona I had worn for the past 5 years. "It is a private venture capital firm," I stated calmly, my voice projecting clearly across the massive dining room. "My firm. I am the sole founder and chief executive officer of K-Nova Holdings." A collective, deafening gasp erupted from the dozens of relatives standing around us. Tasha dropped her expensive designer clutch onto the floor, her jaw practically unhinged. Beatrice stumbled backward, bumping heavily into a dining chair, as if she had just been physically struck. Dion just stared at me, his eyes wide and vacant, completely unable to process the magnitude of the words I had just spoken. "You," Dion whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of shock and sheer disbelief. "You are an auditor. You check spreadsheets for a mid-level accounting firm. You do not own a venture capital firm. You do not have that kind of money." I smiled, a genuine, powerful smile that radiated complete authority. "You never actually paid attention to what I did for a living, Dion. You and your elitist family were too busy mocking my modest wardrobe and my quiet demeanor to ever ask about my actual client list. I am a forensic accountant and a private investor. For the last 4 years, I have been the shadow consultant, evaluating Uncle Silas's entire corporate portfolio." I took a slow, confident step toward my soon-to-be ex-husband, enjoying the way he instinctively shrank back from my presence. "Silas knew your mother was draining the family accounts to fund her country club lifestyle. He knew your sister Tasha was drowning in secret credit card debt. And he knew you lacked the basic business acumen to run a lemonade stand, let alone a multi-million-dollar real estate empire. He trusted me to audit his businesses, and he trusted me to protect his legacy from your boundless greed. We spent months secretly drafting this exact contingency plan in Harrison's office." Dion shook his head violently, refusing to accept his crushing defeat. "You manipulated him," Dion accused, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You brainwashed a dying old man to steal my birthright. You planned this from the very beginning." I laughed softly, shaking my head at his endless victim mentality. "I did not plan your blatant infidelity, Dion. I did not force you to impregnate a 24-year-old receptionist, and I certainly did not force you to slam divorce papers onto my plate in front of your entire family. You made those catastrophic choices entirely on your own. Uncle Silas just gave you enough rope to hang yourself, and you gladly tied the knot." I turned my attention to Beatrice and Tasha, who were both watching me with expressions of pure, unadulterated terror. "You wanted to know my place in this family, Beatrice?" I asked, my voice ringing with undeniable power. "My place is at the absolute top of the food chain. I own the $15 million. I own the controlling shares of Silas Enterprises. And as of 3 minutes ago, I own the very ground you and your entire family are standing on right now." I pulled my car onto the pristine, tree-lined street of our upscale Buckhead neighborhood the very next morning. The bright Georgia sun was just beginning to hit the towering brick facades of the luxury townhouses, casting long, elegant shadows across the immaculate sidewalks. I had left the chaotic repast the night before, without saying another single word, leaving Dion and his greedy family to choke on the devastating reality of my $15 million takeover. I knew my soon-to-be ex-husband would not take his crushing defeat quietly. Dion was a man driven entirely by his incredibly fragile ego and a desperate, pathetic need to maintain his false image of ultimate power. I fully expected a swift retaliation from him. I just did not expect it to be this remarkably cliché. As my vehicle rolled to a smooth, silent stop in front of the grand three-story property we had shared for the last 5 years, the very first thing I noticed was the garbage. Dozens of cheap, thin black trash bags were scattered haphazardly across the perfectly manicured green lawn. Some of the flimsy plastic bags had torn completely open upon impact, spilling my custom-tailored business blazers, my expensive silk blouses, and my designer leather shoes directly into the damp, dew-covered grass. Standing at the absolute top of the grand brick staircase was a hired locksmith. His heavy power drill whined loudly, a grating metallic sound, as he violently bored into the expensive brass hardware of my heavy mahogany front door. And standing right below the locksmith on the wide front porch, acting like the victorious lords of a newly conquered manor, were Dion, his mother Beatrice, and his young mistress Chloe. Dion was dressed in his casual designer loungewear, sipping a cup of coffee with an expression of supreme unearned arrogance plastered across his face. Chloe, the 24-year-old receptionist who had helped destroy my marriage, was clinging tightly to Dion's left arm. The sheer audacity of the girl was actually astounding. She was standing on my front porch wearing one of my own expensive imported silk robes, lazily rubbing her slightly rounded, pregnant belly, as if she had already claimed her throne. Beatrice stood on the other side of them, arms crossed tightly over her chest, looking down her sharp nose at my car with an expression of pure elitist triumph. I put my car in park, turned off the engine, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. I smoothed down the front of my sharp navy blue business suit. I did not rush toward the lawn. I did not scramble to pick up my expensive clothes from the wet grass. I simply closed my car door with a solid thud and leaned casually against the polished hood of my vehicle, resting my hands comfortably in my pockets. Dion practically skipped down the front brick steps, unable to contain his arrogant excitement. He stopped right at the edge of the manicured lawn, using the scattered bags of my clothing as a physical barrier between us. He smirked, pointing a dismissive finger at my face. "You might have used your sneaky little accounting tricks to steal my uncle's money," Kiara Dion shouted, making sure his voice carried down the quiet, wealthy street. "But you are absolutely not getting this house. This is my property. Chloe and my son are moving in today. We are starting our real family right here, and you are entirely trespassing. I have already called the cops to have you formally escorted off my property. They are on their way right now." I looked at him, completely unbothered by his loud, aggressive performance. I slowly shifted my gaze to Chloe, who was now leaning over the porch railing, grinning down at me with all the foolish confidence of a young woman who thought she had just secured a lifetime of wealth. "I hope you do not mind, Kiara," Chloe called out, her voice dripping with fake sugary sweetness. "Dion said I could have your old home office for the nursery. It has the best natural light in the whole house. I am going to paint the walls a nice baby blue. And thank you for leaving this silk robe behind. It is incredibly comfortable." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. The irony of a receptionist wearing my discarded clothes while standing outside a house she could never afford on her own was simply too rich to ignore. "Enjoy the robe, Chloe," I replied smoothly. "It requires dry cleaning only, which might be a bit outside your standard budget very soon." Chloe's fake smile faltered instantly. She gripped the railing tighter, her knuckles turning white. Dion stepped forward, his face flushing with immediate anger at my total lack of intimidation. "Do not speak to the mother of my child that way," Dion barked, trying to puff out his chest and project authority. "You have absolutely no power here anymore, Kiara. You can take your little venture capital firm and shove it. You are standing on my land. I want you to grab your trash bags off my grass and get out of my sight before the police arrive and arrest you in front of the entire neighborhood." Before I could even formulate a response to his hollow threats, Beatrice marched proudly down the brick steps to join her son on the front lawn. She was practically vibrating with toxic vindication. She adjusted her signature pearl necklace and glared at me with absolute contempt. "Did you honestly really think a woman of your incredibly lowly background could outsmart this family?" Beatrice taunted, her voice echoing with decades of classist prejudice. "You are the daughter of public school teachers, Kiara. You come from absolutely nothing. You do not possess the pedigree, the connections, or the ruthless intellect required to survive in our world. You thought you could blindside us at the repast and leave my son with nothing. But you forgot one crucial detail. Dayon paid the down payment on this beautiful house 5 years ago. His name secures this estate. Beatrice took another step forward, kicking one of my silk blouses further into the damp dirt with the pointed toe of her expensive shoe. We are reclaiming our elite status today, she continued, completely drunk on her own delusional narrative. My son is a brilliant businessman. Kicking you out onto the street and securing a proper home for his new heir is just the first step in his massive comeback. When the police arrive, I am going to personally ensure they put you in handcuffs for trespassing and harassing my family. I looked down at the silk blouse Beatrice had just kicked into the mud. I felt absolutely no attachment to it. It was just fabric. It was just an object. My true power lay in the undisputed facts, the verified financial records, and the undeniable truth hidden inside my leather briefcase. Dion crossed his arms, matching his mother's confident posture. You hear that, Kiara? The locksmith is almost finished changing every single deadbolt on those doors. Your keys are completely useless now. You have exactly zero access to this property. You are locked out of my life, locked out of my house, and locked out of my future. I suggest you start picking up your pathetic little wardrobe before the authorities drag you away. I did not move a single inch. I simply leaned back against my car, crossing my ankles in a relaxed, comfortable stance. I raised my left hand and casually inspected my flawless, freshly painted manicure. I let the silence stretch out between us, forcing them to sit in the awkward, heavy tension of my complete and utter calm. My lack of panic was clearly beginning to unnerve them. Dion shifted his weight uncomfortably from one foot to the other. Beatrice narrowed her eyes, searching my face for any sign of the devastating heartbreak she so desperately wanted to witness. "Why are you just standing there?" Dion demanded, his voice, losing a tiny fraction of its previous booming confidence. "I told you I called the police. They are going to forcibly remove you from my property." I finally looked up from my nails and met his angry, confused gaze. "I am standing here because I am waiting for the police, Dion." I answered, my tone perfectly, even and entirely devoid of fear. "I think having law enforcement present for this particular transition is a spectacular idea. In fact, I am incredibly grateful you took the initiative to call them yourself. It saves me the trouble of dialing dispatch." Dion frowned deeply, exchanging a quick, uncertain glance with his mother. Beatrice immediately scoffed, waving her hand to dismiss his sudden hesitation. "She is just bluffing," Beatrice reassured him loudly. "She is trying to save face because she knows she is absolutely lost. Do not let her play these pathetic little psychological mind games with you. She is homeless, jobless, and completely humiliated. Just ignore her until the patrol cars arrive." Chloe called out from the porch again, trying to regain her footing in the verbal battle. "You should probably start packing your bags into your trunk, Kiara. The grass is getting them all wet. It is honestly just sad to watch you stand there acting like you still own the place." I smiled up at the young, naive girl wearing my stolen robe. "Oh, Chloe," I replied softly, my voice carrying a sharp, dangerous edge. "You have absolutely no idea how property law works in the state of Georgia, do you? But do not worry. You are about to get a very thorough, highly educational crash course in real estate foreclosure." The low, distant wail of police sirens suddenly echoed through the crisp morning air, cutting off whatever foolish response Chloe was preparing to shout back at me. The sound grew steadily louder, bouncing off the brick facades of the wealthy neighborhood. Dion's face lit up with renewed, arrogant joy. He turned to look down the street, his chest puffing out with absolute pride, as a white and blue Atlanta police cruiser turned the corner and headed directly toward our location. Finally, Dion announced, turning back to glare at me with pure, unfiltered malice. "The authorities are here. Your little staring contest is officially over, Kiara. You are going to be escorted away from my home, like the common criminal you are. I hope your wealthy new venture capital firm has enough cash on hand to post your bail today." I pushed myself off the hood of my car and stood up straight, smoothing down my tailored suit jacket one final time. I reached into my leather briefcase and wrapped my fingers firmly around a thick, legally certified folder. I listened to the police cruiser pull up right behind my vehicle, the tires crunching softly against the pavement. Dion was smiling a massive, victorious smile, completely convinced that the police were coming to arrest me and throw me out of the neighborhood. But I was smiling too. I was smiling because I knew exactly what verified documents were sitting inside my briefcase, and I knew exactly who was about to be thrown out onto the street. The two Atlanta police officers stepped out of their marked cruiser, adjusting their utility belts as they assessed the strange scene on my front lawn. Dion immediately marched down the brick pathway to meet them halfway. He completely ignored the scattered trash bags containing my expensive clothes, walking right over a silk blouse to greet the authorities. He puffed out his chest, adjusting the lapels of his expensive designer lounge jacket, effortlessly slipping into the role of the aggrieved, wealthy homeowner who was simply trying to protect his pregnant new girlfriend and his elderly mother from a crazy, bitter ex-wife. "Officers! Thank goodness you arrived so quickly," Dayon announced, his voice dripping with fabricated exhaustion and false authority. "I am the owner of this property. That woman leaning against the car is my highly unstable ex-wife. I just divorced her yesterday because of her erratic behavior, and now she is refusing to leave my property. We are in the middle of changing the locks for our own safety, and she is openly trespassing. I need her removed from my land immediately in handcuffs if necessary." Beatrice, never one to miss an opportunity for public theatrics, hurried down the steps right behind him. She clutched her signature pearl necklace and put on her best performance of a terrified high society matriarch. She pointed a trembling manicured finger in my direction. "Officers, please listen to my son," Beatrice pleaded, pitching her voice loud enough for the nosy neighbors peeking through their blinds to hear every single word. "This woman is completely unhinged. She lost her mind when my son finally decided to upgrade his life. We are genuinely fearing for our physical safety. Look at her standing there with that threatening briefcase. You need to drag her away before she does something violent to my pregnant future daughter-in-law." Chloe remained safely up on the porch, wrapping my silk robe tightly around her waist, playing the part of the fragile, innocent victim. The locksmith paused his heavy power drill, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating domestic dispute happening right in front of him. The older of the two police officers, a tall, stern-looking man, held up his hand to stop the barrage of dramatic accusations. He looked from Dion's smug face to Beatrice's fake tears, and finally turned his sharp gaze toward me. I was still leaning casually against the polished hood of my car, my ankles crossed, my expression completely serene. I did not look like an unhinged, violent trespasser. I looked like a woman who was perfectly in control of her environment. "All right, let us all take a deep breath and calm down," the older officer instructed, his voice carrying the heavy weight of absolute authority. "We respond to domestic disputes like this every single day. Before anyone gets escorted anywhere, I need to see some formal identification and proof of residence from both parties. Sir, you claim you are the sole owner of this property." Dion stood up incredibly straight, practically vibrating with unearned pride. "Yes, officer, I am the owner," he stated proudly, loudly pronouncing his full name for the entire street to hear. "I am Dion Montgomery. I paid the massive down payment on this luxury townhouse exactly 5 years ago. My name is on the original mortgage and my name secures this estate. This woman has absolutely no legal right to be standing on my grass." The officer nodded slowly, pulling a small notepad from his chest pocket. He turned his attention back to me and began walking toward my car. "Ma'am, I am going to need to see your government-issued identification," he requested politely but firmly. "And if you cannot provide concrete proof that you currently reside at this address, I am going to have to ask you to vacate the premises immediately." I stood up straight, offering the officer a warm, respectful smile. "Of course, officer," I replied smoothly. "I completely understand you are just doing your job. In fact, I am fully prepared to make your job incredibly easy today." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the thick, legally certified folder I had prepared specifically for this exact moment. I extracted my Georgia driver license and handed it to the officer. As he inspected my identification, I handed him the heavy folder. It contained documents adorned with bright official state seals and verified county stamps. "Officers, please run that specific deed through your county database right now," I instructed, my voice carrying a sharp, undeniable edge of authority that made Dayon suddenly shift his weight uncomfortably. "You will find that everything is in perfect order." I slowly turned my body away from the police officers and locked my eyes directly onto my soon-to-be ex-husband. The smug, victorious smile on his face was beginning to crack slowly, replaced by a creeping, chilling sense of confusion. Beatrice stopped her fake crying and narrowed her eyes at me. You paid the massive down payment on this house 5 years ago, Dion. That is a completely accurate statement, I said, projecting my voice so Chloe could hear every single devastating word from the porch. But you conveniently forgot to mention what happened 2 years ago. You forgot to mention that you started taking secret weekend trips to casinos in Atlantic City. You forgot to mention that you were quietly siphoning money directly out of our joint household accounts to fund your pathetic, destructive gambling addiction and to buy cheap designer knockoffs for your various mistresses. Dion's jaw dropped open. His face flushed a deep, violent shade of crimson. Shut up, he hissed, glancing nervously at Chloe, who had suddenly dropped her fragile victim act and was now gripping the porch railing with wide, terrified eyes. You do not know what you are talking about. You are lying. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. The police officers were currently speaking into their radio, verifying the documents I had handed them, leaving me free to absolutely dismantle Dion's entire reality. I am a forensic accountant, Dion. I reminded him, my tone dripping with icy condescension. I literally track missing funds for a living. Did you honestly think I would not notice when the mortgage payments stopped clearing the bank? You gambled away the monthly payments for 9 consecutive months. The bank was completely done with your excuses. They had filed the paperwork. They were going to foreclose on this property and throw us both out onto the street. You almost left us homeless. Beatrice gasped loudly, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. She turned to stare at her son in absolute horror. Dion, tell me she is lying. Beatrice demanded, her voice shaking. Tell me you did not gamble away the mortgage. Dion could not answer her. He was staring at me, his chest heaving with panicked, shallow breaths. He knew I had him cornered. When the bank initiated the foreclosure process, they bundled the distressed debt to sell it off at a public auction. I continued mercilessly twisting the knife. But it never made it to the auction block. I intercepted the sale. I utilized the massive capital generated by my private venture capital firm, K Nova Holdings, to purchase the distressed debt directly from the primary lender. I paid off the entire remaining balance of this multi-million-dollar house in one single lump sum cash transaction. Chloe let out a sharp, pathetic squeak from the porch. Wait, she stammered, her voice trembling. If you paid it off, then Dion still owns it, right? You were married. I looked up at the young, naive receptionist and offered her a smile devoid of any warmth. Oh, Chloe, I said softly. I told you that you were about to receive a highly educational crash course in real estate law. When K Nova Holdings purchased the distressed debt, I legally restructured the ownership. I transferred the primary deed into a private blind trust that I completely control, and then I legally transferred the title entirely into my own name. I turned back to Dion, watching his arrogant world burn to the ground. You have not owned this house for 2 entire years, Dion. I quietly removed your name from the deed 24 months ago. You have been living here completely rent-free by my absolute grace alone. You are not a homeowner. You are just a guest who has drastically overstayed his welcome. The older police officer stepped forward, closing his radio with a sharp, definitive click. He handed my driver license and my certified folder back to me with a nod of profound respect. The documents check out completely, the officer announced, his loud voice cutting through the stunned, suffocating silence of the front lawn. The county database confirms that Kiara is the sole undisputed legal owner of this property. Dion Montgomery has absolutely no legal claim to this address. The officer turned his large, imposing frame toward Dion, resting his hand casually on his utility belt. Sir, the officer stated sternly, you are the one who is currently trespassing. You have absolutely no legal right to be changing the locks on this woman's house, and you have no legal right to remove her belongings from the premises. Dion staggered backward, his designer shoes slipping slightly on the damp grass. No, he whispered, shaking his head frantically. No, that is impossible. I paid the down payment. I am the man of the house. You cannot do this to me. Beatrice looked like she was about to physically faint. Her entire high society illusion was crumbling into dust. She grabbed Dion's arm, shaking him violently. Do something, Dion, she shrieked. Tell them to arrest her. Tell them she stole our family home. The second police officer stepped forward, putting an end to their delusional demands. "Ma'am, you need to lower your voice," the officer warned Beatrice. "The property belongs to her. If she asks you to leave, you have to leave right now, or we will be forced to place you all in handcuffs for criminal trespassing and property damage." I looked at the locksmith, who had already begun packing up his heavy power tools, eager to escape the messy legal fallout. "You can leave the original locks exactly as they are," I instructed the locksmith politely. "I will be keeping my current keys." I turned my full, unyielding attention back to the three people standing on my lawn. Dion looked completely hollowed out, a pathetic broken shell of the arrogant man who had demanded a divorce just 24 hours ago. Beatrice was weeping silently, her prestigious reputation entirely destroyed. And Chloe. Chloe was gripping the wooden porch railing, her face buried in her hands. She finally realized the horrifying, undeniable truth. The wealthy, powerful millionaire she thought she had trapped with a pregnancy was actually completely broke. He had no inheritance, he had no job, and now he had absolutely no home. Chloe burst into loud, hysterical tears, the sound of her shattered dreams echoing loudly down the wealthy, pristine street. "You have exactly 10 minutes," I announced, my voice ringing with final, absolute authority. "You have exactly 10 minutes to pack whatever pathetic belongings you can fit into your cars and leave my property forever. If you are still standing on my grass when the clock runs out, I will have the officers drag you away in handcuffs. Your time starts right now. Get out of my sight." Dion stood completely frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, entirely unable to process the absolute finality of my command. Beatrice let out a loud, dramatic wail, clutching her chest, as she finally realized her luxurious, unearned lifestyle was going up in flames. Chloe continued to sob uncontrollably on the porch, her hands trembling as she clutched the railing, the harsh reality of her terrible life choices crashing down upon her. The two police officers simply crossed their arms, standing their ground and waiting for the 10-minute countdown to expire. Before Dion could even attempt to formulate another pathetic excuse, the sharp, deafening sound of screeching tires violently shattered the tense morning silence. A brand new matte black Mercedes-Benz G-Class SUV came hurtling around the corner of the pristine suburban street. The heavy, expensive vehicle swerved aggressively toward my driveway, the massive tires biting harshly into the pavement. The driver slammed on the brakes, bringing the luxury SUV to an abrupt, dramatic halt right behind the parked police cruiser. The driver's side door flew open, and my sister-in-law, Tasha, stepped out onto the asphalt. She was practically vibrating with toxic, unearned arrogance. Tasha was dripping head to toe in flashy designer labels. She wore a pair of oversized dark Chanel sunglasses, a glaringly expensive Gucci silk blouse, and towering Christian Louboutin heels that clicked sharply against the pavement. She slammed the heavy door of the G-Class shut and marched straight toward my front lawn, her eyes locked onto me with pure, unfiltered malice. She had clearly received a frantic text message from Beatrice and had rushed over, fully prepared to defend her brother and her mother. Tasha did not care that two armed police officers were standing right there. She did not care that her brother was looking completely defeated. She only cared about protecting her fragile, fabricated image of absolute superiority. "You manipulative witch!" Tasha shrieked, pointing a long, perfectly manicured finger directly at my face. Her voice echoed down the quiet street, drawing even more attention from the nosy neighbors who were already watching the spectacle. "You honestly think because you used some dirty, underhanded accounting trick to steal a house that you are somehow better than us? You are nothing, Kiara. You are absolute trash." Tasha marched up the brick pathway, her designer heels sinking slightly into the damp grass, completely ignoring the scattered trash bags containing my clothes. She positioned herself right next to her trembling mother, throwing her shoulders back as if she were a queen defending her royal castle. "You picked the wrong family to mess with." Tasha continued, her tone dripping with toxic, elitist venom. "I represent the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta high society. I sit on the boards of the most exclusive charities. I dine with the most powerful people in this state. I know everyone who matters, and I swear to you right now, I will have you completely blacklisted from every single country club, every single networking event, and every single business circle in this entire city. You will never work in Atlanta again. I will make sure you are entirely ruined." I stood there, leaning casually against the polished hood of my car, watching her unhinged, dramatic performance. I did not yell back. I did not raise my voice. I did not give her the satisfaction of a heated emotional argument. I simply reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out my sleek silver iPad. I unlocked the screen with a soft tap and opened a highly secured financial application. I looked up at Tasha, offering her a cold, calculated smile that made her aggressive rant falter for a fraction of a second. Tasha, the only thing you represent is a walking credit liability, I stated smoothly. My voice was quiet, but it carried a sharp, undeniable edge of absolute authority that commanded the entire lawn. Tasha scoffed loudly, tossing her expensive hair over her shoulder. You are just jealous of my lifestyle, she spat back, though her eyes darted nervously toward the iPad in my hands. You have always been jealous of my fashion, my cars, and my connections. I tapped the screen of my iPad, pulling up a highly detailed, deeply hidden spreadsheet. I am a forensic accountant, Tasha. I reminded her, my tone devoid of any warmth. Tracking money is my entire profession. Did you really think you were smart enough to hide your fraudulent financial habits from me? Did you honestly believe I would not notice when you started siphoning funds to maintain your pathetic fake socialite image? Tasha's face suddenly lost a significant amount of color. She took a tiny, involuntary step backward. What are you talking about? She demanded, her voice losing its aggressive volume. I turned the iPad screen slightly so she could see the endless rows of bright red numbers and highlighted transaction records. For the last 14 months, you have been secretly using a set of corporate business credit cards to fund your ridiculous high society lifestyle. I revealed, speaking clearly, so the police officers and Dion could hear every single devastating word. Cards that were originally issued under a subsidiary shell company managed by my firm. You somehow intercepted the mail, activated the cards, and decided to treat them like your own personal piggy bank. Beatrice gasped, turning to look at her daughter in absolute horror. Tasha, tell me she is lying. Beatrice pleaded, her perfect world crumbling even further. Tell me you did not steal credit cards. Tasha could not answer. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The arrogant, untouchable socialite was completely paralyzed by her sudden, brutal exposure. You used my business accounts to buy that Gucci blouse you are wearing right now. I continued reading effortlessly from the glowing screen. You used them to pay for your exclusive country club membership dues. You used them to buy thousands of dollars worth of champagne at Phipps Plaza just last week to impress women who do not even actually like you. You have racked up over $80,000 in fraudulent charges, Tasha. You are not a wealthy socialite. You are a common thief wearing stolen couture. Tasha began to shake. Her manicured hands trembled uncontrollably. You cannot prove that, she whispered desperately, glancing at the two police officers who were now watching her with extreme professional interest. It is a misunderstanding. It is a clerical error. It is documented fraud, I corrected her sharply. But do not worry, Tasha. I am an incredibly efficient problem solver. I am fixing the clerical error right now. With one single deliberate tap of my index finger on the glowing screen of my iPad, I initiated a complete, irreversible financial lockdown. I just permanently canceled every single one of those business credit cards, I announced, turning off the screen and sliding the iPad back into my briefcase. Your endless shopping spree is officially over. The accounts are frozen, the fraud department has been automatically notified, and your completely fake lifestyle is entirely dead. Tasha let out a loud, dramatic wail. She clutched her head, her oversized sunglasses slipping down the bridge of her nose. You cannot do this to me, she shrieked, her carefully constructed image shattering into a million pathetic pieces. I have luncheons to attend. I have gala tickets to buy. You are ruining my life. I simply checked my watch, entirely unmoved by her pathetic, self-centered tears. Your life was already ruined, Tasha. You were just living on borrowed time and stolen money. Speaking of borrowed time, you might want to turn around. Tasha froze. Dion and Beatrice slowly turned their heads to look down the street. The deep, heavy mechanical rumble of a massive diesel engine echoed through the quiet suburban neighborhood. A large, heavy-duty repossession tow truck was rolling slowly down the pristine street, its amber lights flashing brightly in the Georgia morning sun. The truck pulled up right alongside Tasha's brand new matte black Mercedes-Benz G-Class SUV. No, Tasha screamed, her voice cracking with absolute raw panic. She abandoned her family on the lawn and sprinted down the brick pathway as fast as her expensive designer heels would carry her. No, stop. What are you doing? Get away from my car. That is my vehicle. The tow truck driver, a large, burly man wearing a stained canvas jacket, did not even bother to look at her. He expertly backed the heavy truck up to the front bumper of the luxury SUV. He hopped out of the cab, pulled a heavy steel lever, and the mechanical lift immediately began dropping down toward the tires of the Mercedes. I called them exactly 1 hour ago. I projected my voice so Tasha could hear me over the loud grinding gears of the tow truck. I knew you would come rushing over here the second Beatrice texted you. I also knew that you are exactly 4 months behind on your exorbitant lease payments. The dealership has been looking for that specific vehicle for weeks. I simply provided them with the exact GPS coordinates of your location. You are very welcome. Tasha threw herself against the side of the matte black SUV, frantically pounding her fists against the tinted windows. You cannot take it, she sobbed hysterically, completely losing her mind in the middle of the street. I am a Montgomery. I need this car. I have an image to maintain. Do you know who I am? Stop the truck. The tow truck driver completely ignored her frantic, embarrassing tantrum. He swiftly secured the heavy steel hooks underneath the front axle of the luxury vehicle. With a loud mechanical whine, the hydraulic lift engaged, hoisting the front tires of the expensive Mercedes high into the air. Tasha stumbled backward, her designer shoes twisting awkwardly on the asphalt. She fell hard onto her knees right in the middle of the street, her expensive silk blouse scraping against the rough pavement. She threw her head back and let out a piercing, agonizing scream of pure defeat. It was the sound of a woman watching her entire fabricated materialistic identity being physically dragged away from her. The tow truck driver climbed back into his cab, shifted into gear, and slowly drove away down the pristine street, towing the massive symbol of Tasha's fake wealth right along behind him. Tasha remained kneeling on the asphalt, weeping uncontrollably, utterly humiliated in front of the police, her family, and the entire neighborhood. I turned my attention back to Dayon and Beatrice, who were watching the scene unfold with expressions of sheer, unadulterated terror. They finally realized that they were not dealing with a quiet, submissive accountant. They were dealing with a woman who held absolute destructive power over their entire lives. You have exactly 4 minutes left, I reminded Dion, my voice slicing through the crisp morning air like a newly sharpened blade. I suggest you start packing those trash bags. Your time is almost up. Dion stood completely frozen on the damp grass. His hands hung limply at his sides, his eyes darting frantically between the two stoic police officers and the scattered garbage bags containing my discarded clothing. Beatrice was still leaning heavily against the wooden porch railing, her face buried in her hands as she wept over the total destruction of her elite social standing. Down the street, Chloe was sobbing on the front steps, mourning the loss of the luxurious lifestyle she thought she had secured. The entire Montgomery family, a clan that had built their whole identity on unearned arrogance and fake wealth, was currently reduced to a spectacular display of absolute public humiliation. I kept my eyes locked on Dayon, waiting for him to finally accept his crushing defeat and pick up a trash bag. But before he could even bend down to gather my ruined silk blouses, a dark, looming figure detached himself from the shadows of the grand mahogany front door. It was Jamal, Tasha's husband. Jamal was 35 years old, standing 6 feet 2 inches tall and built like a former college athlete who had traded the gym for expensive steakhouses. He loved to loudly introduce himself at upscale Atlanta networking events as a pioneering crypto venture capitalist. He wore a sharp, custom-tailored maroon suit with no tie, a heavy gold chain resting against his collarbone, and a luxury watch that cost more than a modest car. He spent his entire life projecting the image of a brilliant, cutting-edge tech investor who was always just one massive deal away from changing the world. In reality, Jamal was nothing more than a smooth-talking opportunist who preyed on vulnerable people's desperation for quick wealth. Jamal had been hiding inside the luxury townhouse this entire time, watching his wife lose her car and his brother-in-law lose a $15 million fortune through the front window. Now that the immediate chaos had settled slightly, and the two police officers were momentarily distracted by Tasha's loud continuing breakdown down the street, Jamal saw an opportunity to strike. He stepped off the porch and walked slowly toward me, his heavy footsteps thudding against the brick pathway. He did not look at Dayon, who was still staring blankly at the grass. He did not check on his crying mother-in-law. He walked with a predatory, calculated swagger, his dark eyes fixed entirely on me. I watched him approach, feeling a deep, familiar sense of analytical focus settle over my mind. As a forensic accountant, I had spent the last 5 years quietly observing Jamal at mandatory family dinners and holiday parties. I had listened to his grandiose pitches about blockchain technology and decentralized finance. I had watched him convince elderly aunts and uncles to hand over their hard-earned retirement savings for his supposed guaranteed returns. I knew exactly who he was, and I knew exactly what he was about to do. Jamal stopped just 2 feet away from me, deliberately invading my personal space. He used his height and his broad shoulders to physically corner me against the polished hood of my car, trying to block me from the view of the police officers. He leaned in close, the strong, overwhelming scent of his expensive designer cologne, masking the sharp underlying stench of his nervous sweat. "You think you are so incredibly smart, little girl," Jamal whispered. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble dripping with toxic masculinity and street-level intimidation. "You come out here with your fancy legal folders and your little tablet tearing down this family like you are some kind of untouchable mastermind. You think because you outsmarted Dion you can run the whole board. Dion is an idiot, we all know that. But you are dealing with me now, and I am a completely different kind of player." I did not take a single step backward. I did not avert my gaze. I stood perfectly still, looking directly up into his threatening, narrowed eyes. "You are trespassing on my property, Jamal," I stated evenly, my voice devoid of any fear. "I suggest you step back before I alert the officers standing 50 feet away." Jamal let out a harsh, arrogant chuckle, shaking his head slowly. He leaned even closer, his jaw tense with barely suppressed aggression. "You are not going to call the cops on me, Kiara," he threatened softly. "Because if you do, I will completely destroy everything you just built. You think you are the only one in Atlanta who knows how to play the corporate game. I know people in the streets, and more importantly, I know high-level people working inside the IRS. I have connections you cannot even begin to comprehend." I raised a single eyebrow, maintaining my absolute unwavering composure. "Is that right, Jamal?" I asked dryly. "And what exactly are your imaginary federal connections going to do to me?" Jamal smirked clearly, believing he had just gained the upper hand. He crossed his arms over his broad chest, trying to look like a mafia boss dictating terms. "You are going to hand over a 50% cut of Silas's estate right now." Oh, Jamal demanded, his voice hardening into a cold, ruthless command. "You are going to wire $7.5 million into an offshore account that I control. If you refuse, I will personally fabricate a digital paper trail that proves K-Nova Holdings is nothing but an elaborate money laundering front. I will plant fake transaction records linking your venture capital firm to illegal offshore gambling syndicates. I will have the feds knocking on your door by midnight tonight." He paused, letting his heavy, ridiculous threat hang in the crisp morning air. "You will lose the house, the business, and your freedom," he added maliciously. "So you either pay me my cut today, or you spend the rest of your pathetic life rotting in a federal prison. The choice is yours, little girl." I stood there, pinned between my car and his large, intimidating frame. I listened to his elaborate cinematic blackmail scheme with absolute clinical detachment. He truly believed he was starring in a gangster movie. He thought his deep voice and his vague threats of federal investigations would force me to surrender half of a $15 million fortune out of sheer, unadulterated terror. He thought I was just a timid, easily frightened auditor who had gotten lucky with a real estate technicality. I looked Jamal up and down slowly, taking in his expensive maroon suit, his flashy gold chain, and his desperate, sweating forehead. A slow, genuinely amused smile spread across my face. I could not help it. His arrogance was just too spectacularly foolish to take seriously. I did not yell for the police. I did not scream for help. I did not tremble or beg or negotiate. I simply reached back into my genuine leather briefcase and smoothly pulled out my sleek silver iPad. Jamal frowned, his confident smirk faltering slightly as he watched me unlock the glowing screen. "What are you doing?" he demanded, a tiny fraction of uncertainty bleeding into his aggressive tone. "Put that away and listen to me. I am not playing games with you, Kiara." I ignored his blustering demands entirely. I swiped across the glass screen, opening a highly secured encrypted application that housed my most sensitive financial investigations. I tapped a specific folder labeled with his name and looked back up into his confused, angry eyes. "You want to talk about digital paper trails, Jamal?" I asked, my voice dropping into a razor-sharp whisper that carried the lethal weight of absolute verified truth. "Let us talk about paper trails. Let us talk about the Community Uplift Crypto Fund you aggressively promoted and started last year at the First Baptist Church." Jamal froze. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving his skin looking sickly and pale. His arms dropped slowly to his sides. The threatening predatory posture he had held just moments ago vanished entirely, replaced by a sudden, rigid, overwhelming panic. He took a tiny, involuntary step backward, putting much-needed space between us. "How do you know about that fund?" Jamal stammered, his voice suddenly sounding incredibly weak and breathless. "That is private business. It has nothing to do with you." I took a step forward, completely reclaiming the physical space he had just abandoned. I turned the glowing iPad screen just slightly, allowing him to see the endless rows of detailed financial data, offshore routing numbers, and highlighted transaction timestamps illuminating the glass. "Nothing in this family's financial history is private to me, Jamal," I stated coldly, my eyes locking onto his terrified gaze. "I am a professional forensic accountant. I hunt down fraudulent cowards who steal from innocent people for a living." You stood at the pulpit of that church, looking directly into the eyes of elderly Black men and women who had worked hard their entire lives. You promised them that your crypto fund would double their meager retirement savings. You told them you were building generational wealth for the community. You took their checks, Jamal. You took their trust. Jamal began to shake. His chest heaved rapidly under his expensive maroon suit. The loud, arrogant venture capitalist was completely gone, replaced by a terrified, cornered criminal who realized his entire house of cards was currently sitting in the palm of my hand. "You do not understand," Jamal pleaded desperately, glancing around to make sure the police officers were still standing by the road, safely out of earshot. "It was a bad investment cycle. The market crashed. The crypto tokens lost value. I did not steal anything. It was just a terrible market fluctuation. You cannot prove otherwise." I let out a harsh, unforgiving laugh. I did not buy his pathetic excuses for a single second. "Do not insult my intelligence, Jamal," I commanded sharply. "The market did not crash. You never invested a single dime of their money into any cryptocurrency tokens. I tracked the capital from the exact moment it left the church's community bank account. I followed every single digital transfer, every hidden wire routing, and every fake shell company you established to cover your tracks. You did not lose their money in the market. You stole it." Jamal opened his mouth to deny it again, but his voice failed him. He was completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his exposure. He had tried to blackmail a woman who already held the absolute, undisputed evidence of his federal crimes. He had demanded a 50% cut of an inheritance while standing on top of a massive, fragile financial lie that I was about to completely detonate. "You really thought you could intimidate me with fake threats about the IRS?" I continued, my voice dripping with absolute, relentless disdain. "You thought you could use street tactics against a woman who dismantles corporate fraud for breakfast? You are not a venture capitalist, Jamal. You are a common, pathetic thief wearing a very expensive suit bought with stolen elderly retirement funds. You look at me and see a quiet wife you can bully. I look at you and see a walking federal indictment waiting to be filed." Jamal raised his hands in a placating gesture, his palms facing outward as he continued to back away from me. He was sweating profusely now, the expensive cologne entirely overpowered by the sharp stench of his overwhelming fear. "Kiara, please," he begged, his voice cracking horribly. "Keep your voice down. The cops are right there. We can make a deal. We can work this out privately. I will leave you alone. I will never bother you again. Just close that iPad." I did not close the iPad. Instead, I took another step forward, my eyes blazing with righteous, undeniable fury. We are not making any deals, Jamal. You do not have anything I want, and you do not possess an ounce of leverage. You tried to extort a woman who holds the literal keys to your prison cell. You want to talk about paper trails? I am going to show you exactly how a real forensic audit destroys a fake businessman. I held the iPad up higher, ready to deliver the final crushing blow to Jamal's fraudulent existence. I was about to show him the exact offshore routing numbers and the detailed audit report that would end his life as a free man. I held the iPad up higher, ready to deliver the final crushing blow to Jamal's fraudulent existence. I was about to show him the exact offshore routing numbers and the detailed audit report that would end his life as a free man. I tapped the screen once more, opening a heavily encrypted file marked with a bright red warning label. Jamal stared at the glowing glass, his eyes wide and unblinking. I swiped down to the very first transaction record. Look closely, Jamal. I instructed, my voice unwavering and completely devoid of mercy. Do you recognize this specific routing number? This is the primary business checking account for the First Baptist Church of Atlanta. This is the exact location where the hard-working middle-class families of this community deposited their hard-earned money. They trusted you. They believed your smooth-talking, charismatic presentation about empowering young Black men and women through innovative financial technology. You stood at that pulpit, wearing a custom-tailored suit just like the one you have on right now, and you promised them generational wealth. You promised them a better future. Jamal swallowed hard. A thick, heavy bead of sweat rolled down the side of his face, soaking immediately into his starched white collar. You do not understand how venture capital works, Kiara. He choked out, his voice barely a weak, raspy whisper. There is always a high level of risk involved in these types of emerging markets. I fully disclosed the risk factors in the investment prospectus. It was just a highly volatile market cycle. The crypto tokens crashed. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that cut right through his pathetic lies. There was no market cycle, Jamal. There was no overarching investment strategy. You never bought a single cryptocurrency token. You never invested in any decentralized finance projects. From the very second that $250,000 hit your corporate account, you began aggressively siphoning it away. I swiped to the next page on my iPad, bringing up a complex web of highly detailed financial flowcharts. I highlighted a specific transaction path in bright, unmistakable yellow. Here is your volatile market cycle, I said, pointing directly to the illuminated screen. On October 12th, you transferred $50,000 from the Church Scholarship Fund into a fake shell company registered in Delaware. 3 days later, you wired that exact same amount to a hidden offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands. And 24 hours after that, those exact funds were deposited directly into a high-stakes, entirely unregulated sports gambling syndicate based out of Macau. You did not invest their money, Jamal. You gambled it away. Jamal flinched violently, as if I had physically struck him across the face. He looked frantically over his broad shoulder. The 2 Atlanta police officers were still standing near their parked cruiser at the end of the driveway, completely unaware of the massive federal financial crime being exposed just 50 feet away. Keep your voice down. Jamal pleaded, his large hands trembling as he reached out instinctively, trying to cover the glowing screen of my iPad. I will pay it all back. I just need a little more time to liquidate some private assets. I had a bad run at the betting tables, but my mathematical system is totally solid. I can win it all back. I swear to you, Kiara. Just give me 1 month to make the accounts whole. I aggressively swatted his trembling hand away from my device. You do not have any assets to liquidate, Jamal. You are a complete and total fraud. You stole $250,000 meant for Black youth scholarships right here in Atlanta, and you blew every single penny on rigged basketball games and illegal horse races. You literally stole the bright futures of dozens of brilliant kids to feed your pathetic, disgusting gambling addiction. Down the street, Tasha finally stopped crying over her repossessed luxury vehicle. She wiped her mascara-stained eyes and noticed her husband cornering me against my car. Tasha stumbled up the brick pathway, her designer heels clicking unsteadily on the pavement. She looked at Jamal, her face a picture of absolute bewildered confusion. "Jamal, what is going on?" Tasha demanded, her voice shrill and extremely demanding. Why are you begging her? Tell the police to arrest her right now. She just stole my car. Do something to fix this mess immediately. You are a powerful investor. Act like one. Jamal did not even look at his wife. He was completely consumed by the sheer suffocating terror of his impending federal indictment. He kept his dark eyes locked onto my face, silently begging for a mercy he absolutely did not deserve. I turned my attention to Tasha, offering her a cold, calculated smile. Your husband cannot fix anything, Tasha. He cannot even fix his own miserable life. You thought you married a brilliant tech investor who was going to elevate you to the very top of Atlanta high society. But Jamal is completely broke. He has zero capital, zero legitimate investments, and absolutely zero real income. The only thing he actually owns is a massive, crippling gambling debt and a stolen church fund that is going to land him in federal prison for the next 20 years. Tasha gasped loudly, her manicured hands flying up to cover her mouth. She looked at Jamal, waiting eagerly for him to aggressively deny my horrific accusations. She waited for him to puff out his chest and put me in my place. But Jamal just stood there, his broad shoulders slumped in absolute defeat, tears of sheer panic welling up in his eyes. Jamal, Tasha whispered, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated horror. Tell me she is lying to me. Tell me you did not steal money from our own church. He could not answer her. The heavy silence in the suburban driveway was utterly deafening. Even Beatrice and Dayon, who were still standing frozen near the front porch, were staring at Jamal in complete and utter shock. They had spent years bragging to their wealthy friends about their brilliant, successful venture capitalist son-in-law. Now they were watching his entire fabricated identity crumble into worthless dust right before their eyes. I turned my full attention back to Jamal. I tapped the screen of my iPad one final time, pulling up a highly detailed, legally formatted document. It was officially stamped with my venture capital firm's corporate seal. I have already drafted the comprehensive forensic audit report. I whispered, my voice dangerously calm and laced with absolute, undeniable authority. I have meticulously documented every single wire transfer, every fake shell company, and every illegal offshore gambling deposit. I have even attached the specific internet protocol addresses you used to access the betting sites from your home computer. The evidence is completely bulletproof, Jamal. It is neatly packaged and entirely ready to be delivered to the proper authorities. Jamal fell straight to his knees, collapsing onto the damp grass exactly like Dayon had done just an hour earlier. Two highly arrogant, incredibly greedy men, brought completely to their knees by the quiet accountant they had spent 5 long years treating like absolute garbage. Please, Kiara, Jamal sobbed loudly, burying his face in his large, shaking hands. I am begging you, do not send that report to the authorities. They will lock me away forever. I have a family. I have a reputation in this city. You cannot destroy my entire life over one stupid mistake. Stealing $250,000 from underprivileged children is not a mistake, Jamal. It is a deliberate, malicious choice, I stated coldly, showing him absolutely no mercy whatsoever. But I am an incredibly fair woman. I am going to give you exactly one single chance to make this right. Jamal looked up quickly, his tear-streaked face filled with desperate, pathetic hope. Anything, he promised, rapidly nodding his head. I will do anything you want me to do. Just name your price right now. I do not want your dirty, stolen money, I replied in total disgust. You have exactly 24 hours to return every single dime to the First Baptist Church Community Fund. You will wire $250,000 directly back into their primary checking account by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I do not care if you have to sell your expensive maroon suit, your fake gold chains, or every single designer bag your wife owns. I do not care if you have to beg on the street corner. You will make that scholarship account entirely whole. I leaned down slightly, bringing my face just inches from his terrified, wide eyes. Because if that money is not sitting safely in the church's bank account by tomorrow morning, I hit send on this iPad. And I absolutely promise you the Federal Bureau of Investigation Fraud Division will be the ones kicking your front door down tomorrow night. They do not send local patrol cars for federal embezzlement cases, Jamal. They send armed tactical teams. Jamal turned incredibly pale, a sickly, ghostly shade that made him look like he was about to pass out right there on my driveway. He nodded his head frantically, completely unable to form actual coherent words. He scrambled backward on the damp grass, terrified to even remain in my immediate physical presence. He stumbled clumsily to his feet, grabbing Tasha roughly by the arm. "Come on!" Jamal barked, his voice panicked and frantic. "We are leaving right now. We have to go." Tasha tried to resist, digging her expensive designer heels into the asphalt. "But where are we going?" she shrieked, still crying over her repossessed luxury vehicle. "How are we getting home today? My car is gone. We do not have a ride." "I do not care," Jamal shouted, his sheer panic overriding any lingering sense of pride or public decorum. "We will walk. We will call a cab. Just start moving right now." He practically dragged his screaming, thoroughly humiliated wife down the pristine suburban street, fleeing from my property as fast as his legs could carry him. They did not look back. They did not say goodbye to Beatrice or Dayan. They just ran, completely desperate to escape the devastating reality of their impending federal ruin. I stood up straight, smoothing down my tailored navy blue suit jacket. I watched them disappear quickly around the corner, feeling an incredible, overwhelming sense of profound peace wash over my entire body. In the span of a single morning, I had legally evicted my cheating ex-husband, repossessed my sister-in-law's symbol of fake wealth, and completely dismantled my brother-in-law's fraudulent financial empire. I turned my gaze back toward the front porch. Dion and Beatrice were standing completely frozen, staring at me with expressions of sheer, unadulterated terror. They finally understood exactly who they had been messing with for the past 5 years. They finally realized that they had brought a butter knife to a nuclear war. "Your 10 minutes are officially up, Dion," I announced, my voice ringing out with final, absolute authority. "The police officers are walking up the driveway right now. I suggest you grab your garbage bags and start walking." Dion did not argue. He did not yell. He simply bent down, picked up a wet, dirty trash bag filled with his cheap clothes, and began the long, humiliating walk of shame away from the multi-million-dollar home he thought he had stolen. Chloe followed closely behind him, sobbing silently, realizing she had traded her youth for a man who had absolutely nothing left to offer. Beatrice trailed at the very back of the pathetic procession, her head bowed in ultimate defeat. I watched them leave my property, feeling a deep, powerful surge of absolute vindication. But my work was not entirely finished. Dion still thought he could somehow salvage his career at Uncle Silas's company. He still thought he could bounce back and reclaim his elite status in Atlanta high society. I knew exactly where he was planning to make his grand, desperate comeback, and I was already planning my final spectacular strike. The Black Excellence Corporate Gala was happening next week, and I was going to make sure Dion Montgomery never worked in this city again. Exactly 1 week later, the grand lobby of the downtown Waldorf Astoria Hotel was completely transformed into a blinding spectacle of immense wealth and high society prestige. The annual Black Excellence Corporate Gala was the single most anticipated networking event of the entire year for the Atlanta business elite. It was a night where multi-million-dollar deals were secured over crystal glasses of imported champagne, where political alliances were forged, and where the city's most powerful families flaunted their generational wealth in front of the flashing cameras of the local press. It was exactly the kind of highly exclusive environment where my soon-to-be ex-husband believed he belonged. Dayon was utterly desperate to save his rapidly crumbling public image. After being legally evicted from my property and completely cut off from the $15 million inheritance, Dion was currently living out of a cheap budget motel on the dusty outskirts of the city. He had absolutely zero income, zero savings, and zero prospects. But his massive unearned ego simply would not allow him to accept his crushing defeat. Using the very last shred of his fabricated corporate title, Dion had secured a predatory high-interest payday loan with a devastating 400% interest rate. He used that highly toxic borrowed money to purchase a $10,000 VIP table at the gala. He brought his mother Beatrice and his pregnant mistress Chloe along with him to maintain the pathetic illusion of his success. Dayon was clinging to a severe delusion. He firmly believed that if he could just get into this gala, he could corner the senior board members of Silas Enterprises. He planned to pitch them a supposedly revolutionary new logistics project, fully convinced that his last name alone would magically win back his prestigious vice president position and restore his completely destroyed fortune. I arrived at the hotel exactly 45 minutes after the red carpet opened. For the last 5 years, I had attended these glamorous corporate events, wearing quiet, conservative, highly discounted business suits. I had always purposely blended into the background, playing the role of the submissive, unremarkable wife, so Dion could soak up all the attention. But tonight was entirely different. Tonight I was not attending as Dion's boring accountant wife. I was attending as the undisputed primary majority shareholder of the very empire he was desperately trying to claw his way back into. My chauffeur-driven midnight black Maybach glided to a smooth, silent stop right at the edge of the velvet ropes. The valet hurriedly opened my door, and I stepped out onto the plush red carpet. The humid Georgia night air was instantly shattered by the rapid blinding flashes of dozens of press cameras. I was not wearing a cheap suit. I was wearing a breathtaking custom-tailored emerald green silk gown that cascaded perfectly down my figure and pooled elegantly around my designer heels. But the true centerpiece of my ensemble was resting delicately against my collarbone. I was wearing the legendary Montgomery family diamonds. It was a stunning vintage necklace that Uncle Silas had kept locked away in a secure vault for decades, explicitly refusing to let Beatrice anywhere near it because he knew she would try to pawn it. As the newly designated head of his estate, I had claimed it. The reporters immediately began shouting my name, completely captivated by my sudden dramatic physical transformation. Whispers had already begun circulating through the Atlanta financial blogs about a massive anonymous corporate takeover regarding Silas Enterprises. They did not know I was the ruthless chief executive officer behind the acquisition just yet, but they could clearly sense the immense, undeniable power radiating from my every single movement. Inside the grand marble-floored lobby of the Hotel Dayon, Beatrice and Chloe were standing near a towering floral arrangement, desperately trying to look like they actually belonged among the billionaires. Dayon was sweating profusely inside a badly fitted rented tuxedo. Chloe looked thoroughly miserable. The reality of carrying a child for a man who could not even afford to buy her a proper dinner was clearly taking a massive toll on her youthful arrogance. She rubbed her swollen belly, glaring enviously at the wealthy women walking past her. Beatrice, however, was trying her absolute best to project the image of a dominant, untouchable matriarch. She was wearing a heavily beaded silver couture gown that she had obviously rented from an exclusive boutique. I knew for an absolute fact that the rental deposit alone had likely maxed out her very last functioning credit card. She stood with her chin held obnoxiously high, aggressively scanning the lobby for anyone important she could try to manipulate. That was the exact moment the heavy brass doors of the hotel opened, and I walked confidently into the grand lobby. The immediate shift in the room's energy was palpable. Businessmen and socialites turned their heads, their conversations dying down as they admired my custom gown and the brilliant, blinding sparkle of the Montgomery family diamonds. Beatrice's eyes locked onto me, and the color instantly drained from her heavily powdered face. Her jaw dropped open in pure, unadulterated shock. She recognized the diamond necklace immediately. The jewelry she had begged her brother to give her for 30 years was now resting comfortably against my skin. The sheer, overwhelming jealousy that twisted her facial features was absolutely glorious to witness. Dion spotted me a second later, his hands balled into tight, shaking fists at his sides. Seeing me radiating wealth and ultimate authority while he was suffocating under a mountain of payday loan debt was a direct psychological blow to his fragile masculinity. Beatrice quickly grabbed Chloe by the arm, her long fingernails digging sharply into the younger woman's flesh. Beatrice whispered something frantic and aggressive into Chloe's ear. Chloe's eyes darted toward me, narrowing with toxic, bitter resentment. She nodded her head, her face hardening with malicious intent. They thought they could still break me. They thought they could embarrass me in front of the Atlanta press corps and ruin my spectacular entrance. They wanted to drag me right back down to their pathetic, miserable level. I continued walking gracefully across the polished marble floor, making my way toward the massive gilded entrance of the main ballroom. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my expression entirely serene. Beatrice and Chloe deliberately stepped directly into my path, effectively blocking my access to the ballroom doors. Beatrice crossed her arms, trying to block my progress with her rented silver gown. "What are you doing here, Kiara?" Beatrice hissed, her voice trembling with barely contained venomous rage. "You do not belong at a gala like this. You are an absolute fraud. And take off that necklace right now. That jewelry belongs to the Montgomery bloodline. You have absolutely no legal right to wear Silas's diamonds." I did not stop walking. I simply slowed my pace, offering my former mother-in-law a cold, thoroughly amused smile. "I have every legal right, Beatrice. I own the estate. I own the assets. And most importantly, I own the vault. You are just upset because Uncle Silas knew you would sell these beautiful diamonds to pay off your embarrassing country club debts." Chloe suddenly lunged forward. She grabbed a massive, oversized crystal glass of dark red Cabernet from a passing waiter's tray. Her eyes locked onto my emerald green gown with pure destructive hatred. "Oops, my foot slipped," Chloe announced loudly faking a clumsy dramatic stumble. She violently thrust her arm forward, intending to launch the entire glass of dark red wine directly at the center of my chest. She wanted to ruin my custom silk dress. She wanted to humiliate me in front of the dozens of reporters and photographers who were currently making their way into the hotel lobby. She wanted to leave me dripping in sticky red wine, looking like a total victim. But Chloe was young, impulsive, and incredibly predictable. As a forensic accountant, my entire career was built on anticipating the erratic, desperate actions of cornered criminals. I had spent years analyzing the aggressive body language of this toxic family. I saw Chloe's shoulder muscles shift a full second before she even began to throw the glass. I did not flinch. I did not scream. I simply executed a swift, graceful, perfectly calculated sidestep to my right. The heavy splash of dark red wine missed my emerald gown entirely. The liquid sailed harmlessly past my shoulder, flying directly into the space I had just vacated. The wine crashed violently into Beatrice. A diaphaning, horrified gasp echoed through the crowded lobby. The full glass of deep red Cabernet completely drenched the front of Beatrice's expensive rented silver couture gown. The dark liquid splashed violently against her chest, soaking immediately into the delicate, intricate beadwork and rapidly spreading down the front of her expensive dress in a massive, ugly, dark purple stain. Beatrice stood completely frozen in absolute shock. The cold wine dripped from the expensive silver fabric, pooling onto the pristine marble floor around her designer shoes. Her carefully constructed image of high society perfection was instantly permanently destroyed in front of the most powerful people in the city of Atlanta. Chloe gasped, dropping the empty crystal glass onto the floor, where it shattered into a dozen jagged pieces. She covered her mouth with her hands, staring in sheer terror at the catastrophic damage she had just inflicted on her own future mother-in-law. I stood perfectly still, looking at the two of them, with an expression of mild, detached amusement. The flashing cameras of the local press corps immediately swiveled in our direction, rapidly capturing every single humiliating second of Beatrice's wine-soaked disaster. The photographs of her ruined rented dress would be plastered all over the corporate social blogs by morning. I let out a soft, elegant laugh that cut right through the shocked silence of the lobby. I casually signaled a nearby waiter, pulling a crisp white linen napkin from his silver tray. I gently tossed the napkin, letting it flutter down to land right at Beatrice's wine-soaked feet. "Careful, Beatrice," I warned her, my voice carrying a sharp, lethal edge of pure, mocking delight. "I hear the dry cleaning fees for heavily damaged rented couture are incredibly steep. I certainly hope Dion's high-interest payday loan has enough funds left over to cover your massive security deposit." Beatrice let out a strangled, pathetic sob of total humiliation. She crossed her arms over her chest, desperately trying to hide the massive red stain, but it was completely useless. The entire lobby was staring at her, whispering and pointing at the absolute mess she had become. Dayon finally pushed his way through the crowd, his face burning red with embarrassment, as he realized his mother and his mistress had just turned his family name into a public laughingstock. I did not wait for Dayon to speak. I did not give them another second of my valuable time. I simply turned my back on their pathetic, self-inflicted disaster. I adjusted the sparkling Montgomery diamonds resting against my collarbone and strode confidently through the gilded doors and into the grand ballroom, leaving them completely humiliated, deeply in debt, and standing in a literal puddle of their own toxic failures. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria was a masterclass in unapologetic opulence. Towering centerpieces of white orchids and gold-dusted roses dominated dozens of perfectly circular tables. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, flattering glow over the absolute elite of Atlanta's black corporate society. Billionaires and media moguls mingled, securing deals between sips of vintage champagne. I slipped through the gilded doors and blended into the shadows. As a forensic accountant, I learned that the most valuable information is gathered when your target believes they are unobserved. I accepted sparkling water and positioned myself behind a marble pillar to watch the stage. Minutes later, Dion pushed through the doors. He left his weeping mother and humiliated mistress in the lobby, prioritizing his selfish ambition over their public disgrace. He sprinted toward the front, smoothing the lapels of his ill-fitting rented tuxedo. His face was flushed red, but he forcefully pasted on his charismatic smile. He shook hands with executives, projecting an aura of total control. He was desperate. He genuinely believed that if he secured the microphone tonight, he could spin a brilliant lie to win back his position at Silas Enterprises. "Good evening, Atlanta," Dion boomed, his voice echoing loudly through the sound system. He paused, forcing the audience to wait on his every word. "I stand before you tonight, not just as a businessman, but as a grieving family member. As many of you know, my beloved Uncle Silas passed away recently. He was a pioneer for Black excellence in commercial real estate. Most importantly, he was my mentor. He taught me everything I know about leadership vision and corporate ruthlessness. I stood by his side for years, absorbing his genius, preparing for the day when I would carry the massive weight of the Montgomery family legacy on my shoulders. I stood behind the pillar, disgusted by his fabricated narrative. Dion never stood by Uncle Silas for anything other than asking for an advance on his trust fund. Yet here he was, expertly weaponizing his uncle's death to garner sympathy from wealthy investors. It was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. Dion pressed a hand to his chest in a sickening display of fake emotion. "The last few weeks have been difficult for my family," he continued, his tone shifting into a practiced cadence. "We faced unexpected legal hurdles. We dealt with vicious attacks from bitter outsiders who tried to steal our hard-earned wealth during our most vulnerable moment. But the Montgomery bloodline is unbreakable. We rise to the occasion. And tonight I am thrilled to announce that Silas Enterprises is not just surviving my uncle's passing. We are expanding." A ripple of intrigued whispers moved through the ballroom. The wealthy investors leaned in, genuinely piqued. Dion smiled, feeding off their greedy curiosity. He released his grip on the podium and paced across the stage, gesturing broadly. He was putting on the performance of a lifetime, fueled by a high-interest payday loan and sheer desperation. "Under my direct leadership, Silas Enterprises is launching a revolutionary logistics technology initiative," Dion proclaimed proudly. "We are completely digitizing the entire supply chain network across the Southeast. We are integrating advanced artificial intelligence to optimize our commercial properties, reducing overhead waste by 40%. This is a total disruption of the Atlanta real estate market. I have personally overseen the development of this proprietary software, and I am ready to lead our company into a bold new era of staggering profitability." I had to cover my mouth to stop myself from laughing. The revolutionary project he pitched was not his idea. I drafted that exact proposal 2 years ago when Uncle Silas hired me to audit the company's outdated routes. I created the financial models. Dion simply found my discarded presentation folders in our home office and decided to steal my intellectual property to save his pathetic career. He was pitching my brilliance to a room full of billionaires, unaware that the actual architect of the project was currently standing in the back of the room. Dion stopped pacing and returned to the center of the stage. He gripped the microphone stand, his eyes gleaming with absolute delusional triumph. He honestly believed he had won the crowd over. Now he just needed to seal the deal by publicly aligning himself with the new money. "Of course, I cannot take this massive step forward entirely alone," Dayon announced, offering a humble smile that made my stomach turn. As many industry insiders may have heard, Silas Enterprises recently underwent a highly confidential ownership transition. The estate debt was acquired, and a new anonymous majority shareholder has stepped in to provide the massive capital backing required for my new technological initiative. Dion puffed his chest out, adjusting his rented bow tie. He looked toward the front row of VIP tables, expecting to see an elderly, easily manipulated business crony of his late uncle waiting to be introduced. Dion had convinced himself that whoever bought the distressed debt was just another rich, disconnected corporate suit who would gladly let the charismatic nephew run the daily operations. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on this exciting new partnership, Dion boomed, raising his voice to a triumphant crescendo. I would like to invite the newly appointed anonymous majority shareholder of Silas Enterprises to the stage right now. Please come forward and officially endorse my leadership. Let us show this city that the Montgomery legacy is stronger than ever before. Dion extended his arm toward the grand staircase leading up to the stage. He plastered a welcoming, subservient smile on his face, ready to shake the hand of his new wealthy benefactor. He waited for a wealthy old man to stand up. He waited for the crowd to erupt into supportive applause. Instead, the grand ballroom fell into a sudden, heavy, deeply uncomfortable silence. No one stood up from the front row. No one clapped. The wealthy elite simply looked around, waiting for the mystery investor to reveal themselves. At the very back of the room, I gave a sharp, subtle nod to the audio-visual director standing in the sound booth. I had paid him a generous, untraceable cash bonus, exactly 1 hour before the gala began. The director immediately hit the main lighting board. The bright ambient chandeliers illuminating the ballroom suddenly dimmed into darkness. A powerful, brilliant white spotlight snapped on, slicing through the darkness and hitting the heavy gilded doors at the very back of the room. A dramatic, heavy instrumental track swelled through the massive speakers, replacing the soft jazz with a powerful cinematic beat. The entire crowd of hundreds of Atlanta's most elite power players turned their heads simultaneously, following the blinding beam of the spotlight. I stepped out from behind the marble pillar and walked directly into the center of the brilliant white light. The emerald green silk of my custom designer gown shimmered spectacularly, catching the illumination and reflecting it back into the darkened room. The vintage Montgomery family diamonds resting heavily against my collarbones sparked like pure fire. I kept my head held high, my posture perfectly straight, radiating the absolute terrifying power of a woman who held their entire financial world in the palm of her hand. I began my slow, deliberate walk down the center aisle of the grand ballroom. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the sharp, rhythmic clicking of my designer heels hitting the polished floorboards. The billionaire tech founders, the ruthless developers, and the legacy media moguls parted like the Red Sea, creating a wide, unobstructed path for me to approach the stage. They stared at me with wide eyes, completely captivated by the sheer magnitude of my presence. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the stage. Dayon was standing at the acrylic podium. The welcoming smile had completely vanished from his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. His dark eyes were bulging out of his head. His mouth hung wide open, gasping for air that his lungs refused to process. He recognized the emerald gown. He recognized the unmistakable sparkle of his uncle's highly guarded diamonds. He recognized the confident, lethal posture, and he finally recognized the woman wearing them. The quiet accountant he had mocked was coming to claim her throne. His hands began to shake violently. The heavy, expensive wireless microphone slipped right through his sweaty, trembling fingers. The microphone hit the hard wooden stage with a deafening, piercing electronic screech that echoed painfully through the silent ballroom. It rolled slowly across the floor, coming to a stop right at the edge of the stage. Dion took a staggering step backward, his legs completely giving out beneath him. He grabbed the acrylic podium to stop himself from collapsing, his knuckles turning pure white. He looked at me walking down the aisle, completely surrounded by the most powerful people in the city, and he finally realized the catastrophic depth of his miserable failure. I did not slow my deliberate pace as I reached the carpeted steps leading up to the main stage. The heavy, suffocating silence in the grand ballroom remained absolute. Hundreds of the most powerful corporate executives, real estate developers, and legacy media moguls in Atlanta simply stared at me, their breath caught in their throats. They watched with undeniable fascination as I effortlessly ascended the stairs, the emerald green silk of my custom gown flowing behind me like liquid glass. Dion was completely paralyzed. He stood frozen behind the clear acrylic podium, his broad shoulders hunched forward in absolute defeat. The arrogant, boastful man who had proudly stood in front of this elite crowd just moments ago was entirely gone. In his place stood a terrified, pathetic fraud. Sweat poured down his forehead, soaking into the collar of his rented tuxedo. He looked like a man who had just been ordered to step up to the guillotine. I walked directly past him without offering him a single glance. I bent down gracefully and picked up the expensive wireless microphone he had dropped onto the polished wooden floorboards. I stood at the very center of the stage, the blinding white spotlight illuminating the vintage Montgomery family diamonds resting against my collarbone. I looked out over the massive sea of wealthy investors and corporate titans. I owned this room.